Ava Thorne was once a top Navy commander who helped shape the doctrines that trained a generation, but after illness forced her into quiet retirement, she became just another forgotten name. That changed when a fleet-wide exercise unknowingly revived her old classified protocols, prompting a ripple of recognition across the Pacific. As Ava steps back into a world that runs on the doctrines she helped build, she confronts legacy, silence, and a new generation ready to challenge the manual. Welcome to my channel. You'd think I'd be used to being dismissed by now, but there was something about standing on the wind-scoured deck of the USS Jackson, watching fighter jets shriek overhead, that brought it all back, the years of proving myself, being overlooked, and learning to do the damn job better than anyone expected. I wasn't in uniform that day. Just a gray windbreaker, jeans, and a baseball cap I tugged low when the sea spray blew sideways. Civilian clothes. Civilian status. That's what the invite said. Honored civilian guest. No rank. No mention of who I used to be. So when the young guard with the high-end tight haircut approached, his tone clipped, and just shy of disrespectful, I didn't take it personally. Ma'am, this area is restricted during flight ops. We'll need you to clear the deck immediately. I didn't argue. I just nodded, showed him the laminated visitor badge they'd issued back at the pier in San Diego, and said, "Understood." But I could tell he didn't even look. His mind had already filed me away as a retired teacher or someone's VIP and who'd gotten lucky with a behind-the-scenes tour. He had no idea who he was talking to. To him, I was just another woman past her prime who didn't know where she didn't belong. But I belonged on that deck more than most of the crew currently running it. I glanced toward the bow. A pair of F-35s were lining up for launch, nose to nose with the edge of the Pacific. The steam catapults hissed, deckhands signaled like they were conducting an orchestra of war. And there I stood, once again on the outside of something I had helped build. I had thought this visit might feel like coming home. Instead, I felt like a ghost. They escorted me without incident. A few of the crew turned to look as I passed, some curious, some smirking. One petty officer leaned into his buddy and said, "Probably some senator's donor. They keep throwing money at the brass and getting VIP slots." I didn't flinch. Not when they walked me toward the hangar bay. Not when they asked if I'd like to take the next chopper back to shore. And not when the youngest one called me ma'am with the kind of tone you reserve for your mom's nosy friend. I just nodded again. "Sure," I said, and waited near the hello pad while they prepped the bird. The rotors started spinning. I climbed in without help. No one offered. Fine by me. As we lifted off, I caught one last look at the flight deck, the intricate ballet of jets, crew, and coordination I knew like the back of my hand. I knew what each color jersey meant. I knew the recovery cycle time. I even spotted a minor mistake in their launch spacing, one I would have chewed out a whole squadron for back when I was wearing 4 stripes. And not one of them knew who I was. But someone did. Somewhere else in the battle group, someone recognized my name when it popped on the daily manifest. Someone who knew that before my hair turned gray and my knees started creaking, I had commanded firepower that could rewrite the map. Her name is Ava Thorne. That's me. I used to be Commander Ava Thorne, Director of Tactical Development for Joint Pacific Command. Once led a unit so secret even our logistics orders were coded to other units. Retired 5 years ago. Not because I wanted to, but because an autoimmune condition forced my hand. Now I was just a civilian with a legacy buried under layers of classified files and faded commendations. And I had intended to keep it that way. But someone who remembered, was about to change everything. The flight back should have taken 20 minutes. We were maybe 7 minutes in, skimming over the Pacific's glittering surface, when the headset on the crew chief crackled. He listened, expression unreadable, and then signaled the pilot to hold. Hold? No one holds mid-transfer without reason. He leaned forward, tapped the headset mic, and shouted something I couldn't hear. The rotors maintained speed, but the nose dipped gently as the hello turned in a wide, deliberate arc. We weren't going back to base. We were returning to the carrier. The crew chief finally turned to me, uncertainty tugging at the corners of his otherwise professional face. "Ma'am, orders just came through. You're being brought back aboard. Admiral's request." I blinked. "Which Admiral?" He hesitated. "Vice Admiral Holden. Aboard the flagship." Holden. That name hadn't crossed my radar in years. Last I'd heard, Holden was a Green Lieutenant Commander shadowing senior staff during the Andaman Shadow exercise, one of the most delicate cross-theater war games ever attempted. I'd given him hell for botching a deception drill, but I also gave him a second shot, and he delivered. I didn't expect him to remember me. and I sure as hell didn't expect him to be giving fleet-wide orders with my name in them. But when we landed back on the carrier deck, everything had changed. Same flight crew, same deck layout, same salt air biting my skin. But the mood was different. Where before there had been dismissive glances and muttered jokes, now there was stillness and silence. The kind that stretches and lingers, like the moment before a funeral hymn starts. One by one, sailors stepped aside as I passed. Not dramatically, no salutes, no grandstanding, but their postures shifted. Eyes followed. Hands dropped from pockets. Even the ones who didn't recognize me recognized something had shifted. My presence now meant something, and no one quite knew why. 2 officers met me at the landing pad, both in working dress blues, both stiff-backed with eyes a little too wide for standard protocol. "Commander Thorne?" one asked. I nodded, and his jaw clenched like he was bracing for something. "Vice Admiral Holden requests your presence aboard the flagship." Immediately. "What's this about?" He didn't answer. Just turned, gesturing toward the waiting Osprey already spinning up on the aft pad. As we lifted off again, me sandwiched between 2 officers who kept sneaking glances, I looked out over the horizon. The Pacific was dotted with steel. Frigates, cruisers, destroyers, carriers, a full-spectrum strike group in the middle of one of the largest readiness drills this hemisphere had seen in decades. And every single one of those ships was slowing down. The wakes trailing behind their hulls were shortening. Not stopping completely, but easing, pausing, like the whole ocean had taken a breath. And somewhere in that sudden pause, I heard it. Not the engines, not the rotors, the silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from sound stopping, but from memory returning. Someone had remembered. Someone had said my name. And the fleet, God help me, had listened. The Osprey banked hard, circling the flagship like it was sizing up a living monument. From above, the USS Providence looked like something carved from steel and purpose. 2 levels of aircraft bays, for radar arrays humming with classified potential, and a bridge rising like a crown over the ocean's pulse. I knew this class, helped write its early tactical deployment doctrine. We touched down, and I stepped out into a wall of heat, noise, and attention. Vice Admiral Holden waited at the edge of the pad. He wasn't the green lieutenant commander I remembered from those long-ago nights in the South Pacific. He wore the weight of command now, creased lines at the corners of his eyes, a voice tight with discipline, and posture that said he didn't lose often. He approached with a purposeful stride, saluted, and said, "Commander Thorne, welcome aboard." I returned the salute. Old habits. Old bones. "I didn't realize I'd be causing such a disruption," I said. He didn't smile. "You didn't. Your name did." Holden motioned for me to walk with him. We passed through a tight corridor that opened into the Combat Information Center, CIC, the brain of the ship, and by extension, the fleet. Dozens of officers worked quietly, screens glowing like constellations. I noticed something immediately. All forward exercises had been suspended. Holden caught my glance. "I called a temporary fleet hold the moment your name came up on the observer manifest. Some of my captains, well, let's just say they asked questions. Hard ones." "Why?" Holden paused at the central console. "Because we're running a simulated first strike scenario based on your work. Your archived operations manual from the Nimitz Initiative Section 12, Red Cascade Protocol." I exhaled slowly. "I wrote the doctrine 15 years ago, and it was black classified." "It still is," he replied. "Which is why no one could explain how we were using it, until someone figured out whose name was buried in the metadata. My name. No medals. No fanfare. No books written. Just an operations manual passed along through need and blood and silence. I had always preferred it that way." A junior officer approached, her face uncertain. "Sir, External Command wants confirmation of the exercise hold. Pacific Command is asking for a sitrep." Holden turned to me. "Do you want to be anonymous, Ava? Or do you want them to know the truth?" I stared at the digital map of the fleet, ships anchored in blue light across 500 miles of ocean. Sailors standing down. Drills halted. Systems paused, waiting. All because someone finally remembered the author behind the theory. "I didn't come here for recognition," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's why you deserve it." And then he toggled the comms. Across every vessel in the 7th Strike Group, the announcement echoed. "This is Vice Admiral Holden." Effective immediately, Commander Ava Thorne, originator of the Cascade Protocol and former CO of Deep Task Unit Orion, is aboard this vessel. All units will hold position until advised otherwise. It was a short message, but the effect rippled like thunder. From CICs to hangar bays, from sonar rooms to fire control decks, heads turned. Old stories surfaced, scraps of classified tales passed down between generations of sailors. A name pulled from the edges of legend. And across the Pacific, 10,000 sailors paused not because they had to, but because they understood what that name meant. I stood in the middle of the Combat Information Center, watching as a dozen officers tried not to stare while pretending to work. You can always tell when a room is quietly buzzing, mouse clicks get softer, chairs stop squeaking. Everyone suddenly has a lot of very interesting spreadsheets. Admiral Holden motioned to a large central display. A 3D map of the fleet blinked in soft blue and gold, surrounding us like a sea of silent ships. We've suspended the red cascade drill, he said. But we want to restart it, with you observing, possibly advising, maybe more. I folded my arms. This isn't my doctrine anymore. It evolved. You've added your own layers. Yeah, he said quietly. But the bones? They're yours. And some of the best parts of it, we still don't fully understand. We follow it because it works. Because the results can't be denied. I gave a dry laugh. You're telling me you've got a whole fleet of officers running tactics they don't fully grasp? He nodded. Every good doctrine has a shadow like that. The difference is now the author is standing in our CIC. A young officer from the Chesapeake, a guided missile cruiser, cleared his throat gently and stepped forward. Ma'am, with all due respect. Red Cascade's Phase 3 counterstrike sequencing, the way it uses false signal buoy chains to simulate dispersed battalion strength? Did that come from the Black Sea decoy operation in '07? My eyes narrowed. You read the old Blue Horizon intercept logs? He nodded. Twice. That's why you didn't get hit in the second round of drone strikes during the simulation, I said, pointing to a logged engagement score on the board. His jaw dropped. The room leaned a little closer without moving a muscle. You improvised a third chain, pushed the decoy nodes west. Yeah, I just thought. You were right, I cut in. You understood the intent, not just the steps. Doctrine's useless without instinct. That's the real art. Silence fell again. Then Admiral Holden said, that's why I wanted them to meet you. Because we train our people to follow orders. But your name? That name reminds them that some orders come from those who've already bled to earn them. I looked around the room. Some of the faces were young 20s, early 30s. Others were older, captains with weather in their eyes. But every one of them wore the same expression, quiet realization that the stories they'd heard, whispered in academy halls or over mugs of rehydrated coffee during night watch, were standing in front of them. I didn't ask for this. But some legacies come looking for you, no matter how far you try to drift from them. Holden pointed to the observation gallery, where the simulation command review would restart in an hour. You up for watching how they've interpreted your playbook? I smirked. Only if I get to heckle them from the back row. He smiled. Deal. But before we left CIC, he said something that stopped me cold. Ava, did you know one of the junior officers aboard the Mason is Lieutenant Karen Thorne? My stomach turned. She your niece? I nodded slowly. My brother's daughter. I haven't spoken to their side of the family in years. She requested reassignment to this exercise when she heard rumors you might be coming. I said nothing. My throat had gone dry. Suddenly, the silence wasn't respectful. It was personal. She's waiting in the wardroom. I took a deep breath. For all my years in war rooms, combat sims, and theater-level drills, nothing ever rattled me like facing family I'd left behind. And this time, I didn't have a doctrine for it. The corridor to the officer's wardroom felt longer than any tarmac I'd ever walked. Funny how it's never the battles or the briefings that tie your stomach in knots. It's family. Always family. Holden peeled off without saying much. Take your time, he said, as if that actually existed in a place like this. I stared at the steel door for a moment before pressing the latch. Inside, it was quiet. Just one figure sitting at a table by the far bulkhead, hunched over a tablet. She stood when she saw me. Karen Thorne had my brother's eyes, same defiant set of the jaw. Mid-30s, athletic, sharp-edged, like someone who didn't waste time on frills. Her working blues were spotless. Not new, just cared for. She wore her name tag like a badge she'd had to fight for. Commander, she said. Lieutenant, I replied, nodding. It was awkward. Neither of us moved. Then she stepped forward, held something out. A photo. Do you remember this? I took it. It was faded, corners bent. Me, in full flight gear, standing beside her at age 9. Her arms were wrapped around a stuffed dolphin. I remembered that trip, one weekend of shore leave when I visited them in Corpus Christi. We'd walked along the beach and talked about the ocean, and she'd asked me if girls were allowed to fly fighter jets. I told her we were allowed to fly anything we had the guts to train for. That weekend stuck with me, she said. You probably forgot about it, but I didn't. I nodded, quiet. I didn't forget. I just didn't think I'd earned the right to reach out. Karen's mouth twitched. Because you cut ties with Dad? Because I wasn't sure I could handle what came with staying connected. We stood there for a while, the silence thick but not sharp, just full, like two sailors drifting toward the same buoy from opposite directions. I joined the Navy because of you, she said at last. They taught us Cascade doctrine at War College. I didn't know it was yours until last year, when I saw your name on the legacy files. It felt like someone pulled the sea out from under me. I wasn't trying to hide, I said, but I wasn't trying to be found either. I think part of me signed up hoping I'd find you anyway. That hit harder than any missile strike. She motioned to the screen in front of her, showing tactical overlays of the current simulation. They're using Red Cascade tonight. I'm running one of the counter-scout groups aboard the Mason. It's surreal. Because the enemy doctrine is based on your aunt's playbook? She cracked a smile. Yeah, that. And because I get to run a drill written by the same woman who told me dolphins couldn't fly, but fighter jets could. That got a laugh out of me. The first real one in days. Then she said, almost shyly, would you sit in on my team's post-run debrief? Just once. I want them to see the ghost we've all been chasing. I tilted my head. Ghost? Karen shrugged. You've been a rumor in our playbooks for a long time. I'd like them to meet the real thing. I considered it. This trip was never supposed to be about appearances. But maybe, just maybe, it was about legacy in motion. And maybe it was about showing the next generation what legacy actually looks like. All right, Lieutenant, I said, offering her a hand. Lead the way. She took it. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt something I hadn't in a long, long time. Family. That night, the simulation ran hot. Carrier group movements, decoy drones, multi-domain strike sequences, all playing out on screens the size of barn doors. The air was thick with caffeine, code words, and anticipation. I stood in the rear of the flagship's main strategic room as teams piped in from cruisers, destroyers, and subs. Each crew fed updates into the system like nerves to a central brain. This was war gaming at its sharpest, pure theory shaped by real reflexes. Karen sat at the head of one table with her crew. Her voice was clear, crisp, confident. Scout Group Echo reporting. Intercepted 2 ghost signatures. One confirmed hostile, one still evaluating. She didn't look back at me. Didn't need to. She was in the zone. They were running Phase 2 of Red Cascade now. The scenario simulated a disinformation blitz, a cyber siege flooding friendly networks with false intel. That phase had been my design, a test of nerve and clarity under confusion. I'd written the phrase in the original manual. In war, the first casualty is confidence. The first victory is knowing which signal is real. Now I got to watch a new generation try to solve it. A captain from the USS Henderson leaned forward on the monitor feed. Mason's recon group just outmaneuvered the strike sim by 40 seconds. That's a first. Another officer whistled low. They're tracing breadcrumbs, but the trail's moving. Karen's team was tracking 3 phantom targets. She'd guessed that the third was the real one, based on signal degradation patterns. She adjusted course manually and bypassed the AI-suggested route. That move had saved them. Because in Cascade, the key wasn't speed, it was skepticism. That doctrine had been born in a war game during a real blackout in the Philippine Sea. Our feeds had gone dark for 6 hours. Most units panicked. Mine didn't. I told them what I always believed. If you can't see the horizon, feel the water. It worked then. And tonight, Karen had just repeated that lesson without ever hearing it from me. I stepped forward when the simulation ended. Holden looked over and gave a subtle nod. Let's hear from the architect. A hush swept the room. I wasn't wearing a uniform. Didn't have a rank anymore. But when I spoke, I could feel the room leaning toward the words like sailors catching wind. You all executed something tonight I never expected to see in my lifetime. Red Cascade Phase 2, run live, across an entire strike group. And you didn't just follow the script. You questioned it. I looked at Karen. You challenged your sensors. You distrusted your software. And you trusted each other. That's the real doctrine, not the flowchart. One young officer raised a hand. Commander Thorne, if I may, why build a simulation around confusion and false data? Isn't that dangerous in an actual engagement? Absolutely, I replied. But not training for it is worse. Because the first time you get lied to in a fight, that's when the real danger begins. Another asked, did you base the scenario on a real-world event? I smiled thinly. Let's just say, yes. And the outcome wasn't as clean then. We lost good people. But the lesson stuck. Karen stood beside me now. Silent. Steady. I looked at her, then back at the room. Your job isn't to win with perfect systems. It's to win when everything breaks. Cascade Doctrine isn't about tech. It's about thinking like the enemy while trusting your own. Silence. Then applause, not loud, not showy, but real. The kind that starts when people understand they've just heard something that's going to matter later, even if they don't know how yet. I stepped out into the hallway a few minutes later. Karen followed. You still speak like a commander, she said. And you lead like one, I answered. She smiled. How long are you staying? I looked out the porthole. The sea stretched wide and calm. As long as they need me, or until they stop asking questions. She nodded, then added, they're going to ask a lot more tomorrow. Good, I said. They should. I barely made it out of the debrief room before a communications officer intercepted me in the corridor, breathless and clearly nervous. Ma'am, Commander, sorry, former Commander, Admiral Holden requests you in the secure conference room. Priority channel open from D.C. There are only 2 reasons the Pentagon calls during a fleet exercise. Something's gone sideways, or something's been noticed. I followed him down the dim passageway, the ship's hum rising and falling like a heartbeat beneath my boots. They buzzed me through 2 security doors into a darkened room lit only by a wide monitor on the wall. A man's face filled the screen. Gray hair. Trim beard. Civilian clothes, but the posture screamed military. The kind of man who didn't blink when budgets hit 9 zeros or when maps lit up in red. Commander Thorne, he said. I'm Director Halvorsen, Joint Ops. We've been monitoring the exercise. Didn't realize I was on your radar, sir, I said. He smirked faintly. You weren't. Until you were. Holden entered quietly, nodding to me, then folding his arms. He didn't sit. The director continued. Cascade Phase 2 was never designed for live simulation without satellite redundancy. Yet tonight, it succeeded, with Lieutenant Thorne's team at the helm. She claims the tactic came from your original framework. I raised an eyebrow. It did. Then I'll be blunt. Why the hell wasn't this included in the Pentagon's updated tactical database? Holden stepped in. Because it was buried under Black Seal Doctrine. The only people who had access were the ones who lived through the original development, Commander Thorne's unit. Everyone else got the scrubbed version. Halvorsen leaned back. Well, that's a problem. Because now we've got teams referencing fragmented doctrine without context. Then unfragment it, I said. You want context? Let me give you some. And I did. For the next 20 minutes, I walked the director through the missing portions, how false signal latency patterns could be weaponized, how electronic decoy feedback loops were built to confuse human analysis, not just AI systems. I told him how Phase 2 wasn't about destroying the enemy, it was about making them destroy themselves. When I finished, he was quiet. Then he said, we'd like you to advise the Joint Doctrine Review Panel. Off the books, of course. I shook my head. Off the books is what buried it in the first place. He smiled tightly. And yet you're here because of it. Holden looked over at me. Ava, this could be good. You wouldn't just be a guest. You'd be shaping how future commanders fight. I took a breath. You don't get to rewrite the map, I said slowly, unless you know what the last one got wrong. Halvorsen nodded. We'll make contact through appropriate channels. For now, we're authorizing full access to the Cascade files. You're reinstated as an operational advisor. Effective immediately. I didn't answer right away. Because suddenly, the past wasn't behind me anymore. It was standing right in front of me, asking if I had one more mission in me. And the strange part? I think I did. Back in my temporary quarters, I sat alone for the first time in hours. My hands trembled, not from nerves, but from memory. I pulled out the old patch I kept in my satchel, a faded black insignia with a silver ripple through its center. The emblem of Orion Group. My old unit. Nobody wore that patch anymore. But tonight, its ghost had flown across the Pacific. And the Navy had remembered. By morning, word had spread. You can't stop a fleet mid-exercise, resurrect a dead doctrine, and assign a retired officer to a Joint Ops Advisory Panel without setting off ripples. Especially not when junior sailors have camera phones and long memories. I was standing in the mess line, trying to grab a coffee like a regular guest, when the first nod came. A chief from the USS Talcott, salt and pepper goatee, gave a subtle glance and said, Ma'am, my old CO talked about you once. Philippines. Oh wait, I didn't believe him. Guess I owe him a beer. A few hours later, a Marine detachment commander approached me near the briefing hall. She said, my last post was at Camp Pendleton. They teach your deception ops in the advanced tactics course. But they never gave a name. Just Thorne variant. She smiled and added, glad to finally meet the variant. By lunchtime, they were calling me that across half the battle group. It should have felt uncomfortable, but instead, it felt like something ancient shifting back into place. Legacy isn't a ceremony. It's a whisper that catches fire. That afternoon, I walked into the main strategy room for the next simulation phase, this time with full clearance and a nameplate reading Commander A. Thorne, Advisor, Cascade Protocol Review. Karen was already there, briefing her team. She glanced at me, grinning. You're late, variant. I shook my head, hiding a smile. I was busy being mythologized. The simulation kicked off hard. This time, the scenario flipped. Our fleet had to defend under conditions of partial compromise. Satellite comms degraded. Systems spoofed. And an unexpected twist, Holden's team had inserted a ghost fleet, enemy vessels that didn't physically exist but were digitally painted into the combat zone. This was new. I leaned in. Whose idea was the ghost fleet? Karen pointed across the room. Lieutenant Ramirez. He's 25 and drinks code for breakfast. Smart kid. He'd weaponized our own tactics against us, something I used to do when I wanted to see if my own team could survive me. For 45 minutes, the room bristled with rapid-fire updates, countermeasures, and flag officer recalculations. The Masons team fell for one decoy, but spotted two more. The Chesapeake nearly launched at a fake target, only for a petty officer to catch a thermal inconsistency in the signal package. It was chaos, the beautiful kind. Creative, intelligent chaos. And they were handling it. After the final report pinged green, indicating containment, not destruction, I stood and addressed the room without waiting to be introduced. You know what impressed me most today? I said, not that you won, that you adapted. The original doctrine you're using? It was built for a different enemy, different tech, in a world before autonomous signal projection. But you didn't just follow it. You questioned it. You evolved it. That's what wins wars. Not checklists. Not myths. Ramirez raised a hand. Ma'am, how do we know when it's time to throw out the playbook entirely? Easy, I said. When it starts costing lives instead of saving them. I scanned the room. You're the generation that has to rewrite it, not just read it. That night, I sat alone again, this time on the observation deck, staring at the sea. Karen joined me with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one over and said, You're kind of a big deal now. Not interested in being a big deal. Too late, she said, smiling. They're already calling your doctrine living history. I laughed into my mug. Living history. Sounds like a museum on a treadmill. She sipped her coffee. They're building on what you gave them. I looked out over the water, where the distant lights of destroyers flickered like a constellation drawn from steel and discipline. No, I said quietly. They're not building on me. They're building forward. Dawn broke clean over the Pacific. From the bridge of the Providence, I watched as sunlight crawled across the decks of ships still holding position like silent sentinels. Soon they'd resume the final phase of the exercise, then break formation and return to port, each vessel sliding back into routine like a gear clicking into place. But for now, it was still. Vice Admiral Holden found me on the forward deck, hands behind his back, wind tugging gently at his cover. Orders came through, he said. The Pentagon wants you in Newport next month. War College Symposium. They're asking you to deliver a keynote. I raised an eyebrow. They want me to wear the uniform again. Your call, he said. But uniform or not, they're finally recognizing the mark you made. I sighed, half amused. Strange, isn't it? A few months ago, I couldn't step onto a deck without being mistaken for a lost tourist. And now, he replied, half the fleet's running drills based on your ideas, and the other half is asking why your name isn't already on a destroyer hull. I shook my head, laughing. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. He handed me a folder, actual paper, which meant it was something special. I opened it. It was a commendation, signed by the Chief of Naval Operations. Language that hinted at legacy, strategic impact, operational brilliance. The kind of wording that comes with plaques and ceremonies. At the bottom, a handwritten note, for the doctrine that saved lives before anyone knew it existed. I closed the folder gently. I didn't do it for this, I said. Holden nodded. I know. That's why it matters. A quiet buzz came through his radio. Sir, transmission just came through from the Mason. Lieutenant Thorne requests channel time with Commander Ava Thorne. Secure. He handed me the mic. I pressed the call button. This is Thorne. Karen's voice came through, clear, but softer than usual. I just wanted to say something before the exercise wraps. Something I didn't get to say yesterday. Go ahead. I used to think legacy was something we inherited, a shadow we had to live under. But after this week, I think legacy is something you live beside, something you walk with, and sometimes, if you're lucky, something that walks back to you. I didn't speak for a long moment. Then I said, I thought I'd left too much behind, that maybe I'd gone silent for too long. You didn't, she said. You just gave the silence time to mean something. That one hit deep. Karen, you made me proud this week. Not just because you ran the drill better than I ever could, but because you asked the right questions. You didn't just follow orders. You thought. You adapted. You taught me that, even if I didn't know it yet. I swallowed a lump in my throat and added, Stay sharp out there, Lieutenant. The sea doesn't forget. Neither do we, Commander. The transmission ended. I stood there a while longer, eyes on the horizon, wondering how many other names had been whispered into doctrine and faded away before anyone could recognize them. How many minds had shaped victories that never made the headlines? That's the thing about true service. The best of it, the very best, is invisible. Not secret. Just quiet. Built into the code, the rhythm, the reflexes of those who follow. Not because they remember the name, but because they remember the standard. I turned to Holden. You heading in for the debrief? In a few minutes, he said. Want to close things out with the senior staff? I nodded. Yeah, I said. Let's finish strong. 3 weeks later, I walked the halls of the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, beneath high archways and framed photographs of admirals and battle groups long gone to rust and sea. It felt strange being back. Not because the place had changed, but because I had. I'd once walked these same halls as a guest instructor in a quiet side room, teaching concepts from the field no one had a name for yet. Back then, I wore a uniform. This time, I wore a dark blazer, no rank, just a name badge that said, Ava Thorne, Visiting Lecturer, Strategic Innovation. The auditorium was packed, officers from 6 countries, graduate students in uniform, instructors, even a few admirals sitting quietly in the back. The title of the lecture had been left deliberately vague, Doctrine in Flux, Leadership Beyond the Manual. When they introduced me, a few murmurs ran through the room. I could feel it again, the ripple of recognition starting to spread. I stepped up to the podium, looked over the crowd, and said, Let me tell you a story. That got their attention. 3 months ago, I stepped onto a carrier deck for the first time in 15 years. I wasn't wearing my uniform. I wasn't listed on the right manifest. A young officer did her job and escorted me off the flight deck. She didn't recognize me. She didn't need to. She was following procedure. A pause. And she was right to do so. A few heads turned. Probably not what they were expecting. But what followed reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. Leadership doesn't live in uniforms or titles. It lives in the decisions people make when they don't know who's watching. I glanced toward the side aisle where Karen stood, watching from the shadows. I nodded. She nodded back. I spent years designing doctrine that was never meant to carry my name, just to carry people home. And I saw something remarkable this year, that doctrine not only survived, it evolved. Because of officers like you. Officers who aren't afraid to challenge the manual when the manual goes quiet. One young woman raised a hand in the second row. Commander Thorne, what's the one thing we should take from your experience? I stepped away from the podium. Doctrine is not gospel. It's not scripture carved in steel. It's a conversation between what you've inherited and what you're about to face. And when those two don't match, you rewrite it. Not for glory, not for credit, but so someone else can survive a fight you'll never see. There was no applause at first, just quiet. The kind of quiet that follows realization. The kind of quiet I've come to respect most. After the session ended, a Japanese naval officer approached. His English was sharp, precise. Ma'am, he said, when we run Red Cascade now, we refer to Phase 2 as Thorne's Gambit. Did you know? I shook my head. No, but I'm honored. He bowed slightly. As are we. That evening, as the sun set over Narragansett Bay, I walked alone to the seawall. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that carries echoes. Out there, destroyers were still training, carriers still sailed, and young officers were still questioning everything they'd been handed. As they should. I pulled out the old Orion patch from my satchel again. The edges were frayed now, silver thread nearly worn to white. I placed it on the stone wall beside me. No fanfare. No salute. Just a gesture to say thank you. The sea didn't respond. It didn't need to. Because I knew. Some legacies are shouted. Others are whispered in doctrine and carried by those who don't even know your name. And the ones that matter most? They don't sink. They sail on.